Thank you everyone for joining us today, and a very happy Nowruz to all of you. I'm Solmaz Mohajer. I'm an assistant professor at the Earth and Environmental Sciences Department at the UCA campus in Khorog, and I will be moderating today's lecture. As you may know, this lecture is the fourth talk in our 2021 spring semester series, and we have 5 more lectures coming up before the end of semester. So if you get a chance, we invite you to also join us for those lectures as well. And each lecture is about 45 minutes. So today's lecture is about 45 minutes, and we have roughly about half an hour or 30 minutes for questions and answers toward the end. Please feel free to use the chat box toward the end of the talk for sending your questions, and I will do my best to make sure that they are read. And I also ask you to kindly keep your microphone muted during the lecture and only unmute yourself, of course, when you have something to say. So with that, I am very pleased to introduce our today's speaker and my colleague, Soheil Ashrafi. Soheil is an assistant professor and chair of communications and media department at the UCA's Naryn campus. And though I haven't met Soheil in person yet, my virtual impression of him is a curious man, dedicated to his work and colleagues, and of course, always open to think outside of the box and pushing the boundaries, pushing through our perceived limitations as researchers. Soheil completed his PhD about 7 years ago in visual communication design at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. And during this time, his research focused on visual representation of language and how writing systems of different languages can be combined to shape a new kind of writing system. And 2 of the languages that he integrated are English and Farsi. And there are some really beautiful examples of this fusion in his dissertation work and the paper that he published after his PhD. Now, before joining the UCA, Soheil served as a senior lecturer and program director of culture and communication program at Raffles College of Design in Sydney, where he used a collaborative and very transdisciplinary curriculum architecture to develop and teach design and visual communication courses. Now, for his talk today, which is titled Knowledge in the Age of Research Industry, Soheil is encouraging all of us to wander freely for a moment today and trace back the art of thinking and knowledge to its original roots, and explore how this art has evolved to become what we know today as research industry. And with that, I will give the floor or the screen to Soheil.
Thank you so much, Solmaz. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm humbled. And yes, let me just welcome everyone to today's talk, and my greetings and happy Nowruz. All the best in this new year, wherever you are. And yes, as you can tell from the title of the talk, Knowledge in the Age of Research Industry, I should confess that I might appear a little bit unprepared because the whole thing happened very quickly in the past few days. And this topic is a very special topic for myself. And this is something which I reflect on constantly, as a side project, or perhaps as the key project for me. I don't know yet exactly what I'm doing with this topic, but it is very important to me. And I wanted to clarify that the topic is not based on any structured research, as you might expect from other talks. It is very personal, and it might be of a manifesto nature. So welcome to my manifesto. And knowledge in the age of research industry. Let me see if I can move my, okay. What is the plan for today? Why this topic? I think this is a very important question that we need to address. And then we will discuss the principles that the talk draws on. And I would really like to clarify that as well. We will talk a little bit about the history of knowledge being in crisis. And because this is the whole gist of today's topic, that knowledge is still in crisis. Doesn't matter that how we think about it, how confident we are about it, how sure we are in our assumptions about knowledge. Knowledge has been constantly in crisis, and even in this age, the age of research industry is still in crisis. So theories concerning the structure of knowledge, we will review that quickly. And I will try to address also the genuine attempts at advancing knowledge and what that would mean. And current state of knowledge generation and conclusion. So this is the plan, and let's see how we go. So I think this is a very familiar image, and all the names are familiar. And all the names, as we see here, are representing probably the most important institutions responsible for knowledge, dissemination of knowledge and generation of knowledge. And there are actually nations and states proud of these names. So, and we take them for granted because these are the brands in the very current state of knowledge generation that drives our consciousness about ourselves and about who we are as a human species. Just to be a little bit more democratic, I included some names from Asia as well. And these are some great universities from Asia. Again, the competition between all these institutions is something that we are all familiar with. And we are encouraging our students just to grow by applying to these institutions and to become better academicians, better researchers, better humans. So, and this image, I'm sure that is familiar with to everyone, that this is a map. We see a lot of maps these days, but this is one of the most important maps that shows the world university rankings top 800, and we can see the distribution of all these great, famous, renowned, and proud institutions around the world. So again, this is part of our consciousness of who we are as educators, as academicians, as students, future students, parents, and so on. Again, I'm sure that most of academicians around the world are familiar with such kind of tables, graphs, and statistics, impact factor journal ranking 2019-18, and you know, which journals get more cited and why, and metrics, and all this information, you know, which is available to everyone pretty much around the world. And this is a very important information. It's not like any other information. It's an information based on which we get promoted, you know, we get jobs, and probably people become famous, become renowned, you know, and they become talk of everybody. So my okay, let's have a look at this image. It might appear a little bit irrelevant or random, but this image I thought can explain the nature of what we do as educators, as academicians, as researchers. We have a scaffolding here around a building, and we know that the painters, the technicians, craftspeople, you know, use this structure just to reach the heights on these buildings to the painting. And I use this picture as an analogy to explain that we academicians and educators are very much like those painters standing on this scaffolding. And what is our job? Our job is just to put the paint on the wall. So, and we become really good at it. You know, after a while, you know, we learn about different paints. We learn how to use the brush more economically, you know, more efficiently. And some of us become very good painters. Some of us become very good researchers. So, but how many of us really think about the scaffolding we're standing on? You know, we think about the paint, we think about the wall, because this is the object of our study. This is the task that we are preoccupied with. But how many of our researchers, academicians, educators really think about that scaffolding that we're standing on? So this presentation is not about that building, it's not about the paint, it's not about the wall, it's about the scaffolding so that we are standing on, and to what extent we can think about it in today's world, and to what extent we can question it, to what extent we can make sure this is a really firm and a stable scaffolding that we are standing on, and it's not going to fall. So this topic is driven by few principles. And the first one is Kant's notion of the public use of reason. In his very short, small, very concise letter as an answer to the question of enlightenment in 1783, you can see, the date on that letter. It's only 8 pages, but it still is well, widely read by philosophers and philosophy students. And in that letter, Kant argues, what do we mean by enlightenment? And he distinguishes between 2 ways of thinking. One is public use of reason, and the other is private. And what Kant means, Kant, by private use of reason, he means that the reasoning, the kind of reasoning that we use when we are engaged in our craft. For example, if I'm working for a retail shop and I'm supposed to perform certain tasks, so I just use my reasoning to do my task and to fulfill the responsibility assigned to me. That is the private use of reasoning. The public use is that, according to Kant, when that shopkeeper comes out and in the public, and I start thinking about his position and his job as a shopkeeper. So in the second way of reasoning, that shopkeeper is able to reflect on the nature, the meaning, the sense of his job. And according to Kant, the second sense of this, human reason, which is very important to the age of enlightenment. Of course, when you're working at university, again, coming back to ourselves, we have to follow the policies. We have to tick all the boxes, on paper. We have to create reports. We have to publish. We have to do the teaching. And in order to create a constant flow of work, we don't really need to criticize, or we are not allowed or permitted to criticize the system. We just keep doing it. But this platform, like today, is the chance for us to exercise our public reasoning about who we are as academicians and educators, regardless of the policies, of all those metrics, of that map I showed you, and everything else. It's a public use of reason, which is very important. The second principle is the phenomenological notion of epoch, which is about suspension of judgment. We are animal species, humans, that we make judgment about everything. We weigh up all the time the choices we have, the decisions we make, the objects we face, the problem we face. We are weighing up, animal. Epoch says, forget about all the judgments you have, forget about all your beliefs, forget about all your opinions, because all these opinions and beliefs are solidified throughout, your life, through media, through education. Someone has told you about it. It's the force imposed upon you by all institutions to think in a certain way. So Epoch says, just suspend all your judgment. We're going to start from scratch. Forget about university rankings, forget about all the metrics, forget about all those renowned institutions. We are going to start afresh. So it's not easy, it's very difficult, I know, but that's how we're going to do it today. Another inspiration to my thought is because, as the title of the talk also communicates, is culture industry, the culture industry enlightenment as mass deception. And for those familiar with social sciences and philosophy, it's a very important school of thought in the first half of 20th century by Adorno and Horkheimer, 2 German thinkers who reflected on the state of life in a very radical capitalist society. And they coined the term, culture industry, that culture is no longer originating from nature, but culture is determined and conditioned by industry. As a result of that, we have a mass society, we have mass culture, and we have commoditization and standardization of culture, which can lead to conformism and inauthenticity of consciousness. My position is that in our age, in the age of research industry, there is not much difference between culture industry and research industry. So research has been radically commoditized, has been radically standardized. It's only certain ways you do it. In certain journals you publish it, and in certain ways you can get recognition. But that has created a culture of conformism and inauthenticity of consciousness about knowledge. And this familiar face, Gandhi. I like him. He was a rebel. And he was not only a rebel against the British imperialism, he was a rebel against also the Indian culture. So he was critical of Indian culture. And Gandhi says something very insightful. Gandhi on humanism, he says the legitimacy of an idea is determined by the acid test of reason. It's very short, but it's so powerful. So you don't accept any idea by any source of authority. That authority can be Harvard University, according to Gandhi, has to pass the test, the acid test of reason. That authority is the largest development agency providing lots of funds to institutions and universities. We forget about it. It has to pass the acid test of reason. Or even towering figures in the history of human knowledge, Aristotle, Plato, Kant, Newton, Einstein. We have to keep questioning, we have to keep criticizing. And that is again an inspiration to my thought and this familiar image. So we are all sitting in this cave as Plato described in his allegory of cave. And we are amused by the images moving around on the wall. And we think that's the image of the reality. But according to Plato, that's not the image of reality. It's not the reality at all. So that's a manipulated image of reality. And you have to find a way out of the cave. I'm trying it. I'm not out of the cave yet, but I try to find a way out of the cave. And this cave perhaps is a society, is the institutional life, is a professional life that we're all living in. So perhaps, again, we need to unchain ourselves to break the chains and find a way out of the cave. So those are the principles, those are the inspirations. But here I want to draw your attention to something very interesting. What academia and academician mean? So we use these terms every day, in the classroom, in our office, at our meetings, in conversations with friends, colleagues. But what do they mean? It's very interesting to see that there is a similarity between academician and technician, for example. And technician, if you break it down, it is made of technique plus yen, which means one from or belonging to. So a technician is a person who belongs to technique. That's a very etymological meaning of the term. So a technician, as we understand, is a craftsman, is a person with manual skills, is a person who does iterative tasks and jobs without critical thinking. So if you go back to Kant's, a reflection on enlightenment, a craftsman or a technician is using only the private reason. I just use my reason to do the task. So how about academician? It's made of academia, which goes back to ancient Greece, the garden of discourse, where Plato conducted his classes. And again, that I-A-N or yan, which means belonging to that garden. But it's very important to us for us to understand what is discourse. Discourse comes from discourses, and discourses means running to and fro, which is simply dialogue. So knowledge and discourse is created in dialogue. It's highly intersubjective. And dialogue is about exposing yourself to the other. When I expose myself to the other and to the other's idea, when I'm in a conversation with a colleague, I'm exposing myself and my ideas to the other's idea. So in a way, there is a critical way of thinking involved in dialogue because I get criticized, the other get criticized, and then knowledge advances. But if we remove this dialogical and discursive aspect of academia, we simply slide back to this technician world. My argument is that most of academicians, many of them, I don't know the percentage, but I'm critical of it, they're doing a technician job. We go to the class, we teach, we keep publishing and publishing and publishing and publishing without thinking about that scaffolding we're standing on. So it's a private way of reasoning, which is very similar to a technician life. So with this introduction, now we go through history of knowledge being in crisis, because this is not something new. As I said at the beginning, knowledge has always been in crisis. And that's why knowledge has advanced. Because it's not the crisis which is important, it's the consciousness of the crisis which is important. And those who become conscious of the crisis, who makes the genuine contribution to the advancement of knowledge. Those who go through the motion without really thinking too hard about what sort of knowledge we're engaging or we try to advance, is simply, they're technicians. So, you know, back in the days, perhaps about 2,500 years ago, something really interesting happened in the world. Many scholars refer to that time as Axial Age, because quite, you know, it's very mysteriously and miraculously, many civilizations around the world stopped believing in myths and they started the age of reason. So somehow our knowledge about ourselves, about nature, about our, you know, position in the cosmos became problematic, and that's why we took that leap towards reason. That's Axial Age. You can see from Greece, you know, we have all the great thinkers. We have Buddha in, you know, in India, in China, Confucianism, and Middle East. We have a host of different thinkers and prophets and, you know, wise people. In the Middle Age, in the medieval age, the adoption of the Greek philosophy or logical reasoning into the doxa of the Catholic Church became problematic. Again, knowledge became problematic. So how we can reconcile, you know, the Greek philosophy and way of thinking and logic with our faith in God. So that was a huge problem in the medieval ages. And for more than 800 years, preoccupied, you know, a host of great thinkers. It was, you know, reason versus faith. Which one comes first? Which one informs the other? So, but simply that was a problem. That was a problem in the way that we understood ourselves. And here is just a breakdown of how the rise and fall of learning throughout Middle Ages. We can see the Dark Age, and then somehow around 1300 and 1400, you know, knowledge started rising up again due to some interesting developments that today we all we you know commonly understood as the Renaissance time. Again, one of the great thinkers at the height of Renaissance, Pico della Mirandola, this Italian Renaissance man. He published a pamphlet, The Oration on the Dignity of Man, and you can see he's talking about importance of human quest for knowledge. Again, there is a sense of, you know, dissatisfaction with the state of knowledge around 1300 and 1400. And that's the beginning of the new age called Renaissance, which is the rebirth. So we have Descartes. So today Descartes gets a lot of a stick because he's responsible for separating between matter and mind. So his dualism, very famous. So he gets a lot of a stick for that. He's criticized roundly. But one thing, which is, I think the fact that stands out about Descartes is not his conclusion, but rather his method of thinking. So, and that applies to many other thinkers as well, because we may not be happy or agree with the conclusions of a thinker, but we should not dismiss the thinker altogether because we are not happy with the conclusions, but we should go back and find out how he thought and how he directed himself in his thinking. So Descartes still is well read, is the most cited philosopher, you know, in France for sure, and many other places, because of his way of thinking. He was not happy with scholasticism. Scholasticism, you know, again, the name school comes from scholasticism, was the late medieval age school where people practiced philosophy and theology. And most of the time, they got together in a room like this, and they discussed questions like that. how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Hours and hours and hours and hours. So, and Descartes came along and said, this is stupid. This is just waste of time. So why we need to know? This is a stupid question, and there is no way of knowing any answer to this question. So I need to reestablish the entire knowledge. He was very courageous, and he started his own journey. And he laid the rock-solid foundation of knowledge and the way of thinking based on observation and logical reasoning. So, and this is the tree of his science, which is very famous: metaphysics, the roots, the physics is the trunk, and then the other sciences as the branches. So again, the metaphysics is the scaffolding. So today, metaphysics is very, it's a nasty word, it's a metaphysics, don't talk about, it's just metaphysics. And because we are so much preoccupied and confident about physics, and but metaphysics is still important. So we have Francis Bacon, and he's the father. He's considered widely as the father of modern science because he's the one that he laid out the principles of observation, and we know observation is so important to science. So Francis Bacon is another towering figure, right after the Renaissance. And of course, this man, Sir Isaac Newton, and he's perhaps universally valid and sort of eternally valid contribution to physics through reconciliation of mathematics and physics. Again, this man was not only a physicist, he was a metaphysician as well. Because back in the day, people, they don't just start, writing a paper. Before writing a paper, they thought about the principles of reasoning that could support their ideas and their argument. So therefore, in this very important book, Principle Mathematical, he brought together mathematics and physics. Up to then, there were two separate entities, and physics was not a really advanced discipline because it was mainly based on conjectures and speculations. For the first time, this man tried to use mathematics to articulate his ideas, the laws of mechanics and motions, all these famous laws. And this book, he starts with 4 rules of reasoning. That's very interesting. Before he jumps to physics, he tries to argue for the way he's going to argue for his idea. So again, he's going back to the roots that Descartes talked about, which is metaphysics. So this man may not be really a famous outside the circle of philosophers and philosophy community. Giambattista Vico, an Italian thinker, statesman, philosopher, artist. So he wrote this book in 18th century, New Science. Again, Vico, you can see another towering figure. He's not only preoccupied with the objects of a study, but he's also very concerned about how we can create, more meaningful and better reasoned science. So in this book, he talks about epistemology, which is the theory of knowledge, and he's one of the founders of constructive epistemology, and he has a very famous statement in the book that says that what is true is exactly what is made. So again, repeat it. What is true is exactly what is made, which means that the truth is the result, is the product of our intersubjective consciousness and dialogue. So the truth is not someone standing in the corner of the street. We can go and find it and have a handshake. The truth is created as a result of our intersubjective life. Again, somehow criticizing Descartes, criticizing, for example, other important thinkers in history, that truth is not the result of observation, but truth is a result of intersubjective communication. So knowledge advanced with all these ups and downs, with all these upheavals, and with all these great ways of rethinking it. And it rise in 19th century, when, as a result of Sir Isaac Newton's discoveries in physics, science became the champion of knowledge, and physics particularly becomes the champion of all sciences and disciplines. So, but this is the age that sociology comes along, economics comes along, and all these new disciplines comes along. But the question is that, what sort of method these new sciences can use to arrive at valid conclusions? This man, Auguste Comte, he advocated for scientific, absolutely scientific method for social sciences. So there was a huge argument and debate amongst thinkers back in the 19th century to find out how society can be studied, how humans can be studied. And obviously very soon, these two men, Dilthey on the right and Schleiermacher, both of them German, they came along and they started thinking about how this new object of a study as society can be studied methodically and methodologically. So here we see again a debate and a sort of conflict between erklären and verstehen, these two German words. The first one, erklären, stands for explanation, scientific explanation, and verstehen, for the first time, comes into play as understanding. You can't study the society in a way that you study rocks. You have to understand the society. And understanding and interpretation as a way of thinking and reasoning came into the picture just to rescue social sciences from collapse, because social sciences, they didn't have any methods, or at least methods that most figures agreed on. This man, Alfred North Whitehead, the British mathematician and philosopher, he wrote again another book about science. So you can see this repetition in the history of knowledge, this occupation with what is science, how we can define science, what are the foundations of science, what do we mean by science, and what the scientific findings could mean for human life. So this has been a constant question in our history. So he says something very interesting in this book about 19th century. He says that the greatest invention of 19th century is the invention of the method of invention. So very, very, very interesting. And because we just came upon that method through which we can keep inventing. Invention before 19th century was something contingent, was something accidental. Someone did something in the lab and came up with something very interesting. We didn't have any well-defined and agreed upon method for invention. And that's why since late 19th century up to 21st century, we see that human civilization in terms of technological developments, skyrocketed. And this man, my field of study has nothing to do with science or physics, but I really adore this man because he was not only a scientist, he was a visionary man, he was an artist. So, and this is just a draft paper of his seminal paper published in 1905, the special relativity. So the paper, just for the attention of the audiences, the paper had no even one single citation. So the paper is just purely his thought. And at the end of the paper, if you find the original one, there are some few words of acknowledgement, acknowledging one of his friends, because he actually figured out the solution to the problem he was investigating in a conversation. Again, dialogical. It's very interesting. Back to Plato. So, but I'm sure that had that paper been submitted to any scientific journal nowadays, it would have been rejected immediately. It was thanks to ingenuity of Max Planck that he found something very interesting and meaningful in this paper, and he published it. And this new rising star emerged in our history. But, I come back to Einstein because Einstein is very important. This man, with whom I'm very much engaged, Edmund Husserl, a German philosopher, mathematician. He was a mathematician by training, but then he switched to philosophy, and he founded a new school of philosophy called phenomenology. This is the last book he published in 1930s, and before his death, The Crisis of European Sciences. Title is so provocative. And obviously when you find a book with this title, any bookshop, you might just immediately dismiss it that, oh, it's another nonsense. What do you mean by crisis? The whole sciences are in crisis. Are you serious? But this man is serious. So, and in this book, he speaks about how science, hard science and natural science has lost its connection with real life. So it has gone too far in abstraction and in idealization of nature. And he talks about Galileo. There is a chapter dedicated to Galileo because Galileo is a very important, again, scientist and thinker in the history of knowledge. And he has a very interesting statement, famous statement: the great book of nature is written in mathematical language. Again, the nature, all of a sudden, through the work of Galileo, become mathematized. And as a result of that mathematization, this is, again, the new science, you can see. So it's not only Vico and all other guys, even Galileo was trying to lay the foundation of new science. And it was observational. So idealization of nature through scientific abstraction and materialism. So according to Galileo, human reason reflects the order of the universe. And it is only through mathematics that we can discover that order. And therefore, the whole nature is kind of transformed into a series of equations. For example, I deliberately put these little graphs here. This circle doesn't exist in nature. This circle doesn't exist in nature. This is the idealization of geometry through geometry of nature. So, and this is what Husserl in his book trying to argue for, that this is the first step away from the actual nature that we're born into and we live in it, and we try to find, to conduct our life in it. So, we can talk about aletheia and veritas. These are two versions of truth. So veritas is the root word for veracity. We use veracity in English. Veracity means exactness, accuracy. When you make a statement, the ingredients, the elements of your statement should correspond to the elements of the reality. And that is what we mean by veracity, which comes from veritas. It's a Latin word, which is a transformation of aletheia, which comes from Greek philosophy. Aletheia has nothing to do with accuracy and exactness. Aletheia is about unconcealment. When something reveals itself to you, is more allegorical. When you read, for example, parables from the scripture, from all these religious texts, there are some general universal truth. It's not exactness, but it has a very profound meaning. So that is what we mean aletheia. So again, this veritas is a kind of the transformation of the sense of truth throughout history. Idealization didn't happen only in science. Idealization happened even in art. Michelangelo is trying to show that how a man is just emerging from a piece of rock, and that rock perhaps metaphorically represents the age of superstition, for example, of medieval ages. It's the age of humanism, it's the age of Renaissance, and human body became idealized. Another thinker, that I read a lot and I've learned a lot from is Martin Heidegger, the German philosopher, and he has a book, and he has multiple books on the concept and the notion of knowledge. But this book is very important. What is called thinking? So, and in this book, he's highly critical of the state of knowledge and science in around first and second half of 20th century. So, and he has very profound statements in the book. He says that in the age that we're making advancements one after another, everything is just available at our fingerprints, fingertips, and everything is cheaply and readily available to human. We are the most thoughtless human species. So, and why? Because we have gone too far in the direction of calculative thinking at the expense of meditative thinking. here I just put down an excerpt from another interesting book, which is Discourse on Thinking. Again, a great philosopher concerned with thinking. He says that, let us not fool ourselves. All of us, including those who think professionally, including academicians, as it were, are often in our thought pool.
Soheil, we cannot hear you. Can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So all of us, including those who think professionally, as it were, are often in our thought pool. We are all far too easily thoughtless. Thoughtlessness is an uncanny visitor who comes and goes everywhere in today's world. For nowadays, we take in everything in the quickest and cheapest way, only to forget it just as quickly, instantly. So it's a kind of reflection, critical reflection on the state of human life and knowledge. So, and in this particular, which is kind of Discourse on Thinking, is a speech that he gives on the anniversary of a seminal German musician. He talks about calculative thinking and meditative thinking. And he has something highly provocative. No offense to our colleagues, working in natural sciences. He says, "Die Wissenschaft denkt nicht," which means science doesn't think. And science doesn't think, but what he means by that, because science is intrinsically unable to reflect on its methods, because you're trapped, for example, by the methods in physics. You can have your observation, you have access to mathematical, principles, but thinking metaphysically goes beyond physics, and therefore physics is unable to think about it. So in order to think about the roots of thinking, you have to step out of science. So it's not just a provocation, there is a sense of truth in it. And another great thinker is Gadamer. He wrote this book in 1960s, Truth and Method. And he's again concerned with the question of what counts as truth and whether there is any correlation between method and truth. He argues there is no correlation. Even if you use the most precise method, you can end up in absurdity. So there is no correlation between truth and method. And also he argues against, objectivity, whether objectivity is attainable at all. He argues there is no such a thing. Our knowledge, the truth is always grounded in our understanding and interpretation, which is intrinsically intersubjective. Again, he refers back to Vico, and actually he referenced Vico in his book as well. So I try to be that guy, and despite all the danger. And I believe that true and genuine intellectual efforts are made on the border between the known, which is conventionally and through, our sense of community, and absurdity. Standing on the edge of cliff in thinking. And if you look at the history, if you review the history of science, philosophy, all the great thinkers, they were constantly standing on that edge. And the edge, which takes a lot of courage and a lot of daring to try it out. And but that's how knowledge advances. So we have this man, the French thinker, Michel Foucault, in his book, The Order of Things. He puts a lot of weight on the notion of episteme. Episteme means, truth. It's about knowledge. And he argues that the way we think and the way we behave and the way we try to advance knowledge is very much conditioned by the dominant episteme, by the dominant notion of truth at any given time. So that's why no wonder that we are very much driven by all those figures, statistics, metrics that we discussed right at the beginning of the presentation. So, and of course, this man, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, Thomas Kuhn, the American thinker, he published this book around the same time, and he talks about the structure of, knowledge advancement and how knowledge advances. And he's not the first one using the term, but he made it famous, the term paradigm. So again, paradigms are very important in knowledge because paradigms are those general frameworks and structures at any given time defines what is possible and what could be acknowledged as true knowledge. Again, quite unconsciously or subconsciously or subliminally, we are all driven, conditioned, manipulated by those paradigmatical and epistemic, frameworks at work at any given time. So, and he says that what is possible under each paradigm is called normal science. So he talks about normal science, and then normal science gets to the point that there are many exceptional cases. That's a time of crisis. And then scientists start thinking or rethinking again the principles, and then science can take another leap. So that's how it works. That's why no wonder that Einstein was considered at the beginning not a scientist. Many people believe that his science is science fiction because no one could really make sense of the special and general relativity. It was based on counterintuitive thinking. So constituent elements of science, for any scientist, these two are very important. The task that you're trying to deal with, which can be understood as telos. Telos means the goal, the objective, and expected outcomes guided by the episteme or paradigm. Again, what is possible, what task is a legitimate task, within the paradigm of normal science. So it's defined by the episteme and paradigm. And the second is the method. And the method is also determined by the episteme and paradigm. So for example, during time that Newton was writing his book, was doing his observation, he was very much influenced by Galileo, for example. He was very much, influenced by Descartes and their, empiricism and observational studies and so on. So again, the method is not a method that we naturally arrive at. It's the method in most cases given to us. So here I'm just getting to the point that I want to discuss that what is the situation right now. So for reasoning, there are two types of logic. One logic is internal. Internal logic is it's a pure logic, which is based on rules and possibilities native to thought, comes from the structure of human reasoning and human consciousness. And then adventitious logic, which are rules and possibilities imposed on thought. Again, we go down. 2.1, what do we mean by adventitious logic? It includes epistemic, the assumed tendency of mind at any given time. Again, what is normal science, what can be considered normal, and what is abnormal, and what is science fiction, and what is absurdity. And the second is ideological. So this adventitious logic is not only epistemic, it's also ideological. It's determined by politico-economic frameworks. If you look around the world, all these development agencies providing the biggest funds to institutions, universities, researchers, government institutions and organizations, the private sector. So they are all operating under this ideological adventitious logic, defining what is possible and what is desirable and what would be normal and what we, abnormal, all of which are decided by this ideologically driven consciousness, which is dominating our age. Here is a simple rule. So what all this mean? We're all familiar with universal and particular. So, this has been a question since Greek philosophy and it's still valid. And the simple rule is that, if our efforts in advancing knowledge are purely and primarily focused on particular, on a single object, on just here and now, it has less epistemic value compared to the questions and inquiries concerned with universal questions and universal objects of a study. So there is a hierarchy. And the reason is that particulars have expiry dates what is the state of life right now at UCA? We can do research about it, but the findings will be different if we conduct the same research tomorrow. The findings have expiry date, therefore the epistemic value is lower than the universal questions and research and inquiries. So epistemic progress can be horizontal or vertical. We have a host of, large number of researchers around the world only focus on particulars. And what is going on right now here in society, in the market, in our economy. So from a business point of view. So, and you can just keep going along this horizontal line of particulars. I would call it instrumental knowledge. We need this knowledge because that knowledge is an instrument that can lead us to a new technological development, to a new business, to a new policy, and so on. But there are researchers, they start at this level of particulars, but they start making their way upwards to the universal. And there are some gifted people, they're always there. They're always concerned with fundamental knowledge, with universal questions, concepts, notions, and phenomena. Okay. I put it this way just to make it easier. Here and now. Here and now is the question of many policy, administrative, business, marketing, applied research. What is here and now? So we want to know the state of being, the state of life, the state of the market, here and now. So again, I don't need to repeat, what is the epistemic value of such research? But if you go over here's and nows, rather than studying what is going on right here and right now, and you studied over a span of time, over 5 years, over 10 years, then we have this longitudinal or cross-sectional study. So we can see there is an upward movement towards universal. It's not universal yet, but it is definitely the truth which comes out of this study has a longer expiry date than the previous one. And as a result, more epistemic value. What we're looking for, we are constantly looking for patterns and trends. So, and these patterns and trends, fortunately or unfortunately, are subject to change, especially in society. So, and if we can find those perennial, those universal patterns and trends, then we are operating at the level of universal. And there are many sciences that are already and always, in most cases at least, are dealing with universal questions and phenomena. I don't need to go to this, but deductive inductive method, which is again based on the paradigm of particular and universal. In deductive, you start with theory, which is universal, and then it goes to the confirmation, which is particular. In inductive, you start with your observation, which is particular case, and you're aiming at the theory, which is supposed to be at a universal level. So these two research methods, widely used by researchers, they're founded on the principle of particular and universal. Okay. As I said, there are many cases. For example, E equals mc squared. So the very famous equation, perhaps the most famous equation in the world is still, is a universal equation. There are some doubts about it. Still people think that probably this equation breaks down at some levels, in the cosmos or in relation to certain cosmic phenomena. But until further notice, it's a universal equation. Cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. It's not in physics, it's not chemistry, but it has that universal validity. So universal validity of the statement is not going to be, hasn't been questioned yet, and it's not going to be questioned because your thinking presupposes your existence. If you're going to think, you should exist first, and that's the rule. We have theory of evolution. There are again some doubts about it, and they've been argued against, but it still is one of the most valid theories in biology, or even if you go to linguistics. We have theories which concern language at a universal level. Not how, for example, a community uses language, but how language can structure and determine our consciousness. again, you can see there are two different questions. James Joyce, widely considered the father of modern literature, the Irish writer, he says something very interesting. In the particular is contained the universal. So it's not the question that the object of my study is just something very specific here and now. It is the way of thinking that would determine whether that object is particular or universal. Here is the trick. So because in every particular, the universal is contained. It is the way of your thinking, your observation, your understanding. So for example, you know, many physicists and many scientists and many philosophers start with something here and now, but they are able to extrapolate, to generalize from that individual case to arrive at something more universal. So therefore, this statement given by a writer, by an author, not a scientist, has a great deal of truth and sense to communicate to us. You know, the concept of Bildung comes to mind here. I don't know, Bildung is another German word, became very widely used in 19th century. It stands for culture, but that's a very direct translation, which doesn't convey the whole sense of the term. But Bildung means when you can abstract yourself from the particular situation you find yourself in. It has a very difficult sense to get, but you know, Bildung is culture, Bildung is cultivation of virtues. There are other interpretations of Bildung, but the way, for example, Hegel, the German philosopher, uses the term Bildung, he says that Bildung is not about cultivation of virtues. The person who is possessed of Bildung is a person who can abstract and distance himself or herself from a particular situation. So an angry man, this is exactly what Hegel says, an angry man lacks Bildung because you get angry as a result of that present situation. But if you can distance from that situation, anger disappears. So anger is not just a sign of anarchy, it's just a sign of lacking Bildung as well, according to Hegel. My conclusion, as we are occupied with the particular in our research profession, we must be able to reflect on the sense and being of our profession at the universal level. And that has been the quest pursued by great thinkers and great philosophers and scientists throughout the history. As we are guided and affected by the adventitious logic of epistemic and ideological frameworks, I'm referring here to those funding bodies, institutions, brands, names, sources of authority, we must be able to explore the marginalized regions of thought. We should not limit ourselves to the epistemic and ideological frameworks laid out by those institutions, because those institutions are pursuing their own interests. They're not necessarily pursuing the interests of human knowledge. You know, they have political and economic interest in such kind of projects. But we as thinkers, I never use the word academician for myself because of being a technician. I don't want to be a technician, and I try to be a thinker. And thinker is always meditating and reflecting on phenomena. And we have to retain our intellectual independence. As Jose Ortega y Gasset, the Spanish philosopher, said at the beginning of 20th century, he says, we don't know what is happening to us, and this is exactly what is happening to us. We don't know what is happening to us, and this is exactly what is happening to us. And we are so immersed and preoccupied with all these figures, numbers, stats, names, brands, you know, and perhaps I would say at the surface level, the value of such kind of projects, and we become unconscious. Like a mountain climber, if you just fall asleep, you might die. And we have many walking dead bodies around. And that is what exactly Gasset is trying to say. And my last statement, genuine thinking is radical thinking. And good ideas are always dangerous ideas. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Soheil, for this very thought-provoking lecture, I personally learned a lot about many different historical figures, and also thanks for bringing to our attention all the books that many of us should know about or hopefully have read, but there were so many books that I didn't even know. So this is already a really great dialogue to bring to attention what are some of the things that we should be thinking about, what are some of the things that are important, and I hope that we can take this with us and sort of expand our knowledge in the direction that you're talking about. So I think now it's the time for questions. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and I will make sure that your question gets answered. Or if you feel more comfortable just writing in the chat box, please feel free to do that, and we will also go over those questions as well. So I see Ramzan has a question. Ramzan, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Solmaz. And thank you, Soheil, for this thought-provoking, interesting lecture. I really enjoyed from the beginning till end. I really enjoyed. So just being the Wissenschaft denkt nicht, so it means I'm not thinking my question could be absurd one in a philosophical way. I have a short comment and then following two questions. The first thing is, if we start from Plato to Descartes, what you mentioned, then to Newton. So all those things, a great philosopher, if we started from Plato, let no one ignorant of geometry enter here. So what he wrote in his outside his academy. And then to the Descartes, his contribution connecting geometry with algebra. That's why we have geography and all those things, how the art evolves, or all those things in the knowledge society. And then finally to the Turing, all the computer system, why the Enigma machine, time machine, Turing machine, all this happened. So the question is, if you reflect on all this entire history, and then you said why we should idealize mathematics, is why we should not idealize mathematics. So that is the first part of the question. And the second part is, yes, I do agree we are more into application-oriented research, or the funding organization. Is that what are the purpose, or what are the reasons of declining the decline in the theories, or in the pure knowledge, I could call, because if you look in the contemporary world, the scientific society, yes, we are more into new discoveries, but we don't find any good theories in the last 100 years or so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ramzan. And, I would say there is no objection or question about idealization, which happened in science and mathematics. The whole point is that, or the issue is that when idealization becomes the only true image of the reality. So when we go too far in one direction, we lose sight of the actual reality that we live in. I don't think that anyone can argue against mathematics, such a great discipline, and it has achieved a lot, and through its idealization. But the question is that the only way of thinking about the world? And it's mathematics and physics and computer science and IT, as a result of this digital transformation, are the champions. But the question is that, are there other ways of thinking about ourselves, about the world? And I think that's a question raised by Heidegger, for example, when he talks about meditative thinking. So the way that a poet thinks, these days, we might think that poets are just, jobless, unemployed, useless people. They don't produce anything of value. But much of our history is founded on poetry and literature. So the question is that we have gone too far in one direction, to the benefit of not the entire human society, but to the benefit of certain people. So, and my argument, inspired by all these great thinkers, that we still can make a turn. So, or at least we can make a turn in our heads, even if we are unable to implement it in our society as a new paradigm. But at least as individuals, we should not forget about the beauty, about the value of different kinds of thinking, like meditative. And the second question was about application. There's no fury. Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, why there should be a fury? And as long as we are only concerned with here and now, which is the very paradigm of thinking nowadays, we don't need to think about furies. And that's why we don't have any great theorists. There are few in physics, for example. They're working on the theory of strings and so on. But, you know, where are those great thinkers? What has happened to us in the age that we have mass education, we have the best universities, you know, with billions and billions of dollars as the research funds and the budget every year, we are still unable to produce that level of ingenuity, you know, with which that our thinkers, scientists operated in the past few centuries. I hope you answered your question.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramazan.
Soheil, I see a question also in the chat box. Do you want me to read it to you, or would you like to read it yourself? Do you see it?
I'm trying to, yeah.
It's a question from Salim Hirani.
Yes, please, can you read it out?
Of course, yes. Is there a trade-off between application of knowledge and universal discovery of knowledge? Or are these two complementary, especially in the field of development studies?
Oh, this is a massive question. And, you know, we can talk about it for another hour or so. But, you know, when we talk about application knowledge or application research or applied research, this is necessary for our development, advancement of human society and life and technological development and so on. So the whole point, at least this is my personal view, it's not either or sort of question. It is how we can strike a balance between applied research and universal theoretical research. So my point of view is that we have gone too far in the direction of applied research at the expense of theoretical and universal research. So, but obviously we have solved many problems like poverty, clean air, clean water, education through applied research. And it has its own value, but it should not be exaggerated and inflated as it has been in the past few decades. So we should understand that, yes, it has its own value. It has its own value within its own context, but it's not the entire pursuit or the whole quest of knowledge in humanity. But unfortunately, I would say this is, as an educator, we teach our kids, we teach our students, you know, most of the time about applied research because there's money in applied research, you know, because they can find jobs with applied research. And if you come up with a new piece of technology, with new application, with new program, with new coding system, I don't know, you can make a lot of money. So again, this is an economic actually incentive, which is advantageous, which is not native to human thought, it's been imposed on human thought. So again, it's a radical capitalist society. It's driven by money, and knowledge has become commoditized. Again, I use the term research industry as a correlate for culture industry, that our culture, you know, is determined by industry. Our research and knowledge is determined by industry as well. I hope that I could partially address the question. Thank you, Salim. Thank you so much.
I think Muratbek is next in line.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. Soheil, yes, as always, very thought-provoking and much enjoyed. I'd like to have a couple of comments. Maybe the second one is more like a question, if you can interpret it that way as well. So the first one is obviously much of what we discussed today is Western or Eurocentric or you name it. And there is probably much more that needs to come from other cultures that have not seen much. And this goes alongside of what you mentioned about other ways of thinking. Obviously, there are other great civilizations that were in place, but there are also many other smaller indigenous peoples, ideas and ways of thinking that we haven't thought about. And I'm referring to some of them who are now being championed, especially for addressing the ecological crisis of today. They are not separating the mind and the matter, etc. So that's just an overall comment about other ways of thinking. What's curious, especially as I've recently read a few things by Yuval Harari regarding the merger of infotech and biotech. In one of the examples that he provides in one of his books, I think the recent one was about the 21 lessons for the 21st century, is engineers. The engineers who are using AI for operating self-driving cars. And here is the ethics question, or the philosopher's domain, essentially, about what do you do when you have a choice? The self-driving algorithm, should you save the passenger, who is essentially the owner of the car, or should you maneuver to actually sacrifice the life of the passenger for the lives of the two kids who are passing the road? Of course, these kinds of examples, the so-called tram or trolley or questions that have been pondered by philosophers for centuries, but it didn't really have any significant consequence in the real world, because humans in the real world, we behave in all sorts of ways, not necessarily according to what should be the right way. We have our own idiosyncrasies. But you can be sure that the algorithm in the self-driving car execute the command to the letter. And so now, even though we have not really looked at it in this way, the technicians are actually becoming this so-called ethicists or philosophers, in a sense that they actually have to figure out what kind of judgment they have to place in that algorithm so that the machine can do it. And this is just one small example, and the AI is of course advancing forward, and that's a new area of knowledge, infotech. So I'm just curious about your perspective in here when you were separating technicians and these AI self-driving car engineers are certainly technicians, but they're also engaged in these very tough ethical questions. And so would be great to hear some thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Martek, and very good questions. The first question about indigenous alternative ways of thinking. I think now these alternative ways of thinking are coming into the picture more than before with all the global, environmental crisis that we are facing and global warming. And we need, we can see that, for example, Buddhism is becoming a way of forward. And there are many philosophers and scientists now are making reference to Buddhism and to the principle of non-action. And again, it reminds me of a statement by Heidegger. It says that we take a lot of action, but we think very little. And I think humans have taken too much action on this planet. Perhaps we should just slow down a bit and rethink that the direction, the path that we have set ourselves on. And again, this involves critical thinking. And again, as they say that there was a time back in ancient Greece, people used to think about life, but nowadays we just live the life, and you don't need to think about it. And and these are the guiding principles. But I think now, especially in the West, scientists and philosophers and those engaged in research around global warming issues and sustainability and sustainable development, they're now making reference to indigenous and non-Western ways of thinking, which is good news. And the second question about Harari, he's a very interesting guy, and he's a historian thinking about the future of humanity in the light of these widely, not widely, but wildly advancing AI technology, so an algorithm. So my answer to that question is that there is a fundamental division between rationality and morality. So, and this has been another question in my head for years, that how can we reconcile rationality with morality? For example, the system that Nazis set up during the Second World War to disseminate, to kill, mass kill, the Jewish community, it was highly efficient. It was a very efficient system. You could, at an industrial level, kill people with the minimum resources without any vestige. So it was a highly rational system, logically functioning system, but it was not really moral. So, and the other way, for example, during the medieval ages, there was much more tendency towards morality at the expense of rationality. So again, even in history, we can see that there have been some times leaning too much towards morality, or sometimes, leaning towards, rationality. I think we have to find a way to strike a balance again. And I think that's the whole point of Harari, that with the advancement of AI and the algorithm, and the picture he gives us is quite horrific. And I think a bit of it has been experienced during the pandemic, that how governments are just expanding their power to control every aspect of life through AI, through applications, through internet. So, and what if some dictatorial governments, and he makes reference constantly to North Korea, and what if that the North Korean leader gives one of these wristbands to the people to just measure the heart rate and the way that the emotions might change. So even you don't need to speak your thought anymore. You can get arrested because the moment the leader speaks, you get angry at that person, and but there might be a minor change, little change in your heart rate, and that actually wristband shows it. So it becomes a new tool in the hands of a very dangerous man and a dangerous system. So I still don't know, to be honest. I don't know how we can strike a balance, how we can reconcile rationality and morality. But I think the efforts in sustainable development, for example, in deep ecology, there are some interesting and promising efforts in bridging the gap between our technological advancement and our morality. This is just my answer. I know that it may not be adequate, but.
Okay, great. I don't see any questions in the chat box. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question at this moment? Please write it in the chat box or raise your hand.
Oh, there is one here in the room.
Oh, perfect. Yes.
Musa.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Let me ask this first.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Soheil, thank you for your amazing history lesson. Now, my question is, in math, so truth, or what you call knowledge, is verified by proof methods, which are built on axioms, right? And which led to thoughtlessness. I think I found this very important, thoughtlessness. Exactly what is happening now is very close to this thoughtlessness. We are not thinking. I think that German was right. I mean, in general, of course, not everyone, but we are not thinking what we are doing. We are just following their steps within as you said, within the frame, in a idealized science. My question is, for example, Euclidean geometry, which was built on 7 axioms, and later on, some mathematicians went beyond these axioms, and they came up with another geometry, which is hyperbolic geometry, which is totally different than Euclidean geometry. Maybe we are not courage enough to think out of the frame, or we cannot find the power to organize our thoughts What do you think about this? Thank you.
Thank you, Musa. Yes, the example of Euclidean geometry is a very interesting one, because Newton founded his entire enterprise in physics on Euclidean geometry. And then Einstein, he went beyond Euclidean geometry and he created a non-Euclidean, and the whole general relativity and special relativity, they are based on non-Euclidean. Again, it's just coming out of what is considered normal. So what is considered axioms. And again, it's a way of thinking. For example, Einstein, I know for a fact that Einstein used a lot of non-intuitive thinking or counterintuitive thinking. So, and counterintuitive thinking is very difficult because you have to think beyond what is normal and what is accepted. And not just accepted generally as knowledge, but accepted even through our perception. So, and that is the way that we go to the edge. And even we venture beyond the edge of what is possible or what is considered normal. So I think these moments of rupture, there are many of them in the history. And of course, ingenuity, it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of dedication, and it comes with a cost. You know, you can make a brilliant, fantastic career if you just follow the rules, and you might end up in poverty if you try to break the rules. And that philosophers and scientists are great ones. They broke the rules and they paid the price. But we're not concerned very much as we do nowadays with figure. That is my personal sentiment. Do not trust two things in life: figures and rules. So very dangerous. So because it's full of manipulation. And again, like Gandhi, we have to pass it through the acid test of reason. So I think it's possible, and it's definitely possible. It's not impossible. But do we have any genuine soul on the planet to dedicate himself or herself to the task? And many people prove that it is possible. Thank you, Musa.
We have a question from Khalid Nazar.
Okay, Khalid Nazar.
Hello, thank you,
Hello.
Soheil. It was really great, and I like the conclusion. Genuine thinking is radical thinking, and good ideas are dangerous ones. I know it's kind of food for thoughts, but it would be great to hear, from the author of this sentence, this kind of your thoughts on this.
Genuine thinking is radical?
Yes, genuine thinking is radical thinking, and good ideas are dangerous ones. Why?
My point is that radicalism is something bad. Usually, it is stigmatized. We associate it with extremism and so on. But radicalism in thought is something really good. So, and all the great achievements of humanity, have come through radical thinking. There are so many examples. In science, Einstein was a radical thinker. He was not happy with the current state of physics. He wanted to go beyond. Newton himself, Picasso as an artist, he was definitely dissatisfied with the current state of art. He was a radical artist. So we have radical musicians. So radicalism, the only kind of radicalism which is good and should be respected is radicalism in thinking. And all other radicalism in human behavior, in our actions, obviously must be avoided because it can result in harm. But the radicalism in thought, and in the light of morality, is something really, really good. And good ideas are dangerous ideas because a good idea is an idea which poses a challenge, which raises a question that has never been asked or has never been addressed. But it's a dangerous idea because it poses a danger to the current framework an establishment of knowledge. For example, if you have a very great idea that can call into question, the way that knowledge is propagated through all these institutions around the world, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to them. It's dangerous to their being. It's dangerous to their operation. It's dangerous to their values. And you might get ostracized for a while, but if you have the dedication, enough dedication, you can come out on top and genuinely contribute to knowledge. Not the knowledge contribution, which is acknowledged by institution, because in my opinion, there are two kinds of acknowledgement and recognition. Acknowledgement and recognition coming from institutions, and acknowledgement and recognition comes from history. And there are again so many examples that many of such great thinkers receive no acknowledgement and receive no recognition at all from any institution at that time. But then later on, humanity comes to the conclusion that, wow, what happened during that time or through that book or by that article, and then start reading that book or reading that article again. I think and again, this is my point. We should not let ourselves be deceived by the recognition and acknowledgement we receive from institutions. We should always think that who, would I be or could I be in 50 or 100 years? Who would read my papers? I can just, mass produce papers every month and I get promoted at my institution. But the whole question is that in 50 years, who's going to read my papers? Is anyone going to remember me? I think this is a question we should all ask ourselves, that who we would be in 50 years, in 100 years. And don't be deceived. Like, festivals. We have filmmakers, they go to festivals, they get prizes every year, they're on the stage and they get round of applause. But then in 2 years' time, we don't know what was the movie, who won the prize. But we go back to 30s, to 40s, to 50s, and still watch great movies by great film directors. At the time, not much really acknowledged or recognized. So that is my opinion, that we should go beyond institutions. I'm an anarchist person, in my way of thinking, which is dangerous to say it when you're working for an institution. But I'm exercising the public use of reason and not the private.
Thank you.
Thank you, Khalid Nazar. I think there are two questions. Mehman Shah.
Thank you. Thank you, Soheil. It's really a wonderful presentation. It is not a question, it's just a short. It was really wonderful presentation about the different kind of superstitions, the religious and scientific one. And I think they got the main message of the presentation is about the crisis of knowledge and understanding this crisis and crisis of knowledge. I think when we talk about the crisis and theory change, they go hand in hand. We are talking about today. You mentioned about the research industry today, and also mentioned about the main mistake of the academicians in this time of the research industry, which is being a technician, doing something for, I think this is something which is the people in the time of the Frankfurt School people, they talk about the cultural industry, they talk about for instance, this guy, the philosopher Walter Benjamin, he said that the works of art, they lost their own aura, they lost their own value. And today also we can see that maybe a lot of the researchers, we have a lot of researchers, a lot of academicians in different kind of fields, but the research it lost something, and they became a technician. I think it's not for presentation. I think it's not just the presentation, also it's some kind of the call for understanding the real research, academic work to do and to bring some kind of the change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mehman Shah. Would you like to speak?
Yeah, Soheil, do you know Grigori Perelman? He again announced a war against this industrial research. He won he solved one of the 7 unsolved problems in math, and he won this millennial prize, $1 million, but he didn't go to the ceremony. He rejected that you know. So he didn't want to be a part of this industrial research. Yeah, you look like.
You know, that's a radical thinking, you know, from Marlon Brando, that he rejected to receive the Oscar Prize, and Jean-Paul Sartre, you know, refused to receive the Nobel Prize. And there are so many examples that, you know, for example, Martin Heidegger, one of the greatest philosophers of all time, he received 2 job offers from Berlin University, one of the top universities at the time, and at both times he rejected. And he stayed in Freiburg, in a very small little town, because he thought that his solitude is more important to his philosophical thought than working in a very large and recognized institution. So there are so many examples, and they're inspirational. So I think we, at least, we are in this industry. We are familiar with the logic, and we are supposedly well-educated people, and we are part of the community. We should be able to get out of these tight webs of, you know, self-imposed restrictions, because many of these restrictions are self-imposed. And it's very easy to feel too confident and too comfortable in not doing the right thing. And but anyway, so I think we are way over time. Solmaz, back to you. Yes.
Yes. I guess I'll take just one last question from Salim Sumar in the chat box, and then we'll call it good. So Salim is saying that you mentioned history just now, and yet there are schools of thoughts that say it is not vitally important that historians research the past. Yet historical research helps us understand the choices we have as we face our own problems today and learn from. What are your views? Where do you sit? Do you think much historical research is not particularly useful today?
You know, history is riddled with so many problems, and it is closely associated with the history of colonialism as well, and who tells the story. And history is methodologically one of the most problematic disciplines, but there have been genuine and truth-telling historians who have changed our views about what has gone in the past. And but you know, again, we have pure history, and we have a storytelling and narratives in history. So my position myself is that history is always definitely important. What I am observing as an educator is that our students are getting increasingly detached from history, and that is again abstraction, pure abstraction from the actual life, and 50 centuries from ancient Mesopotamian civilizations up to now, filled with so many achievements, valiant efforts by great towering figures to advance human knowledge and human society, unfortunately are going unnoticed. And in Australia, there is a program, there's a TV show called Q&A, and one night, it's a kind of a TV show with live audience, and people can go there and ask their questions, and always they have very controversial topics. And a professor from the University of Sydney, a mathematician, he made a statement, very kind of, to me, telltale sign of what is going on in our world. He said that we don't need to teach Latin or Greek anymore to our students. They need to learn the language of algorithm. So it was a horrific statement to me, that how we can disconnect ourselves from history, and how we can detach ourselves from history, and without knowing anything about Greek philosophy, Greek civilization, Latin, and indigenous cultures around the world, and just thinking about algorithm. Is that the way forward for humanity? So unfortunately, such kind of views are promoted not only by institutions, but also by some academicians. So, and I think that is really alarming. I respect, I love history myself, as you could tell from my presentation. And as the great Italian statesman said once that during the day I go out, I talk to people, I have conversations with ordinary people in the market. I just want to know about the state of affairs in the society. And but when I go home, I just take off my dirty clothes and I dress up and I sit with the towering figures of human history, and I spend every night 4 hours to read Plato, to read Aristotle, to read Latin thinkers. So I think history is something indispensable and should be considered indispensable. And although it has its own problems, and we have to diversify the voices. Most of the stories told about, for example, this part of the world has been told by Western historians. And we have this discipline, now it's a discipline, Orientalism. And Edward Said, the Palestinian American historian and thinker, his book on Orientalism is an amazing account of the importance of truth-telling in history, and not saying the stories from an outsider point of view, but telling the story from an insider point of view. And I think that is one of the vision of UCA, creating storytellers, and we have to be able to tell our own stories. And that is my reflections just for now. Salim, thank you so much.